squash them or something. They're in Iraq. They got them there. But again, purely a defensive force. I want to kind of shape what happened. Where did ISIS come from? How did they materialize so sudden? Arab Spring. Come back to the Arab Spring with me. When Egypt booted out the Islamic Brotherhood, where'd they go? Iraq. When the legitimate revolutionaries in Syria attacked them, said, "You're not hijacking our revolution, we'll beat Bashar al-Assad one way or the other in due course," where'd they go? Iraq. So this becomes now a magnet. Any other fugitive or terrorist in anywhere in the Arab Peninsula gravitates to Iraq. I said a little earlier, 60+% foreign fighters, that's them. They've come all the way from Afghanistan and Pakistan. They got a government about to be formed, their own country, right? So all the terrorists in the world, for the most part, are zeroing in. I heard today on the news that there were so many recruits for ISIS that came out of the UK, it exceeded, did y'all hear that report? It exceeded the UK's military recruiting efforts for the last month, I guess. So there were more, keep in mind, a lot of terrorists went to the UK as refugees. Even Saddam kicked a lot of the bad guys out. But this is where they come from. They're zeroed in there. They're gathered in one place. I mean, this is if you're a bomber pilot, this is a dream. If you're a tank commander, this is a dream. If you're a special ops commander, is that not just a dream? That's what you call the proverbial target-rich environment. All the bad guys in one place. Zeroing in one up. And so these 85 to 90 airstrikes have really given them a bloody nose. So what do they do? We know that it hurt them because they ran from the Mosul Dam. But what's the next thing they did? Let's fall back on what we know. Terror. Let's behead this journalist. Let's threaten to do the next one. Finally, I heard one word come out of Washington that really described these guys. And President Obama used it yesterday. He said, this is a cancer. And it is. This hate, this extremism that drives this Islamic extremist is a cancer. And it's an abomination to Islam. But it is a cancer. Again, 15,000, thereabouts, ISIS fighters. In Iraq, 35 million. And they're not all Sunni. A lot of them are not even Muslim. This is not a sectarian war. Reject that word when you hear it. In every family in Iraq, you have Shia and Sunni intermarried. A Sunni family, a Shia family, sons and daughters marry. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. One day I was sitting with the National Security Advisor talking about how we're going to get some police commandos to go up and take care of some security things in Mosul back in 2007, 2004 actually. And I'm sitting there with the Deputy National Security Advisor, and I said, sir, General Casey wants to know when we can get a battalion of police commandos. And he said, well, Kim, he said, they're really hard to come out. We got a lot to batten down here in Baghdad, and we'll see if we can come up with them. And I said, we got this area from over here from Fallujah up to Mosul and down we're kind of worried about. He said, are you referring to what your media calls the Sunni Triangle? And I thought, okay, I'm on really thin ice. I can hear the plane warming up to take me out of the country after I get fired this afternoon. I said, well, sir, I don't think I would, that's what the media calls it, but I wouldn't call it Sunni Triangle. I don't think that's a good label. And the deputy looks over at me and he says, Dr. Safar Hussein, he says, Kim, he said, General Faisal is the lead Sunni sheikh in the entire Middle East region, from Syria to Iraq, what used to be Mesopotamia. He said he's the senior sheikh. And I'm speechless. I'm sort of, oh, sir, that's great. I'm proud to meet you. And he kind of laughed and he said, Kim, he said, my wife is Shia. And he said, Dr. Safa is Shia. His wife is Sunni. He said, you've got to tell people that this is not a sectarian civil war and sectarian Shia fault lines and all this vernacular. is such a waste of breath. And all my lights went on. I thought, I got it, sir. You know, I'm not the quickest person, sharper knife in the drawer, but I got it. You know, so believe me, it is not a sectarian civil war. It never has been and won't be. But where did these guys come from? The majority of these folks that are recruited, they're fugitives from other countries, they're paid fighters. Many of them are persona non grata, or they've even been sentenced to death in absentia. A lot of them are just full-time fugitives. But this is a safe haven, and they're going to get paid. And there's also a huge number of weak-minded, very, very uneducated. I mean, there's a massive amount of Saddam knew how to control Iraq. He let very few people have a good education, no women whatsoever. But that's how he controlled the country. So you got a lot of people that buy the line, buy the story that this is a glorious way to go out. Martyr yourself, you know, attack the great Satan, we're being picked on. You know, no one stopped to start thinking about, when we left in 2011, we didn't ask for anything. In history, we've never asked for anything in any country we've liberated, other than a place to bury our dead. Ruth and I went over to Normandy in July and joined a group over there. And that just came alive for me. And of course, there are national burials, cemeteries all over Europe. All over Europe. And it's the only real estate that we asked for, was a place to bury our dead where we liberated countries. But America's current position, strategy, and actions, the real quick recap: protecting American citizens in Iraq, that's really left largely to the Marine security guards. Jeff's a former Marine security guard before he came to Dallas, and in some pretty tough parts of Africa and other parts of the world. So you know what they're up against right now. They're in the middle of the bee's nest. Humanitarian aid to the refugees and limited airstrikes, and very, very limited airstrikes. 85, 90 strikes in, 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I mean, I don't know if fuel's short, we're out of bombs, I don't know what the deal is. But we are really handling these guys with kid gloves. I kind of expected sort of that shock and awe thing, you know, a little bit, when we said we're going to do some airstrikes. But it has been, shock and awe is a laughable term. It's in fact, the amount of strikes we're doing also sends a message. The kid gloves treatment sends a message all into itself. Humanitarian aid to refugees, what's going on there? You got over 500,000 Christians that have fled their homes. Now, a lot of them were in exile and came back and moved back into their homes after Saddam was ousted. But now they've got to leave again because the nuts are trying to take over. These 200,000 Yazidis up in northern Iraq that moved into the mountains just to try to save their lives. But the way forward in Iraq, let's just talk about that for a second or two, because I think that if we don't take some time to understand and become individually definitive on Islamic extremism, if we don't research it, study it, and develop a knowledgeable opinion on it, we don't really have the basis to start evaluating what's at stake there. So what is the Islamic extremist and his goals? I mean, they have been really clear. If we think this is Islam against Christianity or Islam against the rest of the world, what about the tens of thousands of Muslims that these nuts have assassinated? They murdered them. One of those pictures earlier was 1,700 young men at a military academy that were drug off to ditch and shot in the first week. They were Muslim. Islam doesn't allow for that. This is not a religious or a holy war. This is a mass gang of criminals, the worst that the world's ever seen. And if we don't understand what's at stake, then we've forgotten 9/11. We've forgotten Tanzania and Kenya, Nairobi. We've forgotten the embassy in Lebanon, in Beirut, in '83. I mean, you can just look in our history. We're not naive, and we're not babes in the woods with this. We've had our nose bloodied before. We know what is at stake. So then we just think about, okay, we understand this is a dire threat. We understand what's at stake, and it's serious. But how do we define the end state, the desired end state? Well, peace, education. Believe me, when people have good jobs and they have education, they don't want to be terrorists. That history has been proven. You can research just that. What's the most effective thing that dissuades terrorists? Education and a good job. That turns a person around so fast. All of a sudden they can make a living and a better life for their family and themselves. But we need to establish a strategy to accomplish that desired end state. And I had to tell you, I just today, and my frustration, pardon me, personally I'm very frustrated. I don't hear anything about here's our desired end state. Here's what we're going to drive toward in Iraq or Syria or Libya. It's almost like we got a cerebral hard drive crash going on. It's like a vapor load in the administration. And I gotta tell you, I really didn't come tonight to give cheap shots or anything, but I really think that we got a very, very inexperienced crew there. They just don't, and they're so terrified of doing the wrong thing. So they're just seized into inaction because they're terrified to make a big blunder. So doing nothing is the better alternative. But work closely with their military for common defense. They're the best strategic partner we're going to have for a long time in the Middle East other than Israel, is Iraq. They owe their liberation to us. They know it. They love Americans. That 34,987,000, whatever it is, of non-terrorists, absolutely wonder if we're going to give them any help and get rid of these ISIS thugs. So that said, let me tee it up for some questions or some discussions. It doesn't have to be a question to me, but just a meaningful discussion that can especially lead back to desired end state, what's at stake, and what can be a strategy to achieve that desired end state. Yes, sir.
Colonel, I don't know, you may know him, Colonel Dave Grossman. He travels around the world and trains law enforcement on the mindset to prepare for these mass murder events.
Yes.
He advocates that in the United States, it's only a matter of time before these terrorists will do a Belsen, school massacre style attack. What are your views on what you think is in the future for here in the United States and how law enforcement should be preparing for that?
Well, there's a lot of gaming going on. Pardon the term gaming, but scenario-driven what-ifs. The bridges over the Mississippi. We did this one back in 2005 in the Pentagon. Now, what would happen? What would happen if Wall Street was truly brought down? What would happen? There's chain reaction things that can happen. If we have a series of events, 15 guys that pull something like that off, very conventional, no weapons of mass destruction, no nuclear, biological, or chemical, what happens in the United States is economically, we fall on our face. Now, we're not going to be there long. We're going to bounce up, and that's not going to take us to the ground for long. But what it will do is it could well threaten one of our most important assets, and it is the dollar being the world currency. If we lose the dollar being the world currency, and we can't kid ourselves, there are a number of players that really are tired of America being the world currency standard, the dollar. People trade worldwide, they got to exchange in dollars. You got to move rubles into dollars before you can buy, and then you move them back into DR. So if we lose world currency status and there becomes, the European currency or the ruble or the yen or whatever, it's a major economic blow to us. This could cause it very easily. And you think, well, that's not even associated. How would that cause it? It would be such a disruption in our economy, our public confidence, and the confidence in the world in us, that it would only take a few weeks for something like that to happen. That would be worse than a nuclear weapon in some ways.
Colonel.
Yes, sir.
In the news media, we read majority of the ISIS fighters are Sunnis, contrary to what you seem to be saying.
Yes.
Now, Mecca and Medina is the seat of Islam.
Yes.
Under Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni country.
Correct.
And they have funded many, many countries who are predominantly Sunni to do whatever they do.
Yes, yes.
Why don't we, lately we're having some differences with Saudi Arabia, why don't we let Saudi Arabia come in and take over, or put some boots also there to fight this thing?
You
The
know,
Sunni, they are supposed to be leading the Islamic world.
I am with you. And I'll just tell you my personal feelings, exactly what you're saying. We need a UN mandate. We need to enlist. We need to invest the rest of the Middle East, the major players, in Iraq and winning the peace. They're as terrified of this extremism as we are. They're
Yeah, so-
absolutely
So
terrified.
why not have them bring some boots in there?
I mean, now you're talking about a way forward that's just absent today. It's just absent in public discussion. It's absent in the senior planning that's going on. Let me tell you though, you career military guys, you know there's 100 scenarios that have been just worked over in Pentagon. I mean, they're working this kind of scenario. How do we make it happen? How do we respond? If the president asks us, go and collectively put together a unified force that can go in there and settle the peace and sort out the bad guys and get rid of them. Like I say, most of these guys are guilty of crimes that have already been sentenced in their countries, their home countries, 60-70% of them. And you're right, the majority of them are Sunni. It's just where the hotbed has been. And there is a Sunni frustration of being a 20% minority in Iraq, let's face it. Any minority in any country is going to feel like, hey, I don't quite have a full seat at the table. I don't have as many votes to get my representatives in, win things in my direction. The Shia are like 70%. So, it's just the way it is. It's, in Iraq, they're, Iran, it's almost exclusively Shia. Saudi, almost exclusively Sunni. Syria, all Shia. So it's just the demographics, and it goes back to that post-World War I, post-World War II. Do we divide the world up perfect? I say we. Did the free world divide the world up perfect after those two major wars? Probably not. Probably not. Did we help them develop a perfect sovereignty and perfect government in the 10 years we were there? We worked hard at it. We did the best we could. But 10 years is not a long time. I mean, how long did our revolution last? 76 to what, 86? 10 years by itself. And then we worked for a long time trying to sort out the United States government. So, I mean, they got 44 parties. I mean, think about that. How do you manage politics in a country with 44 parties? They used to have 200 parties back in 2005, the first election. Yes, sir.
Along the same line, you mentioned when we were leaving Iraq, you had 243 Chinese at the airport,
Yes.
and we had Russians, and we have Koreans, and they have all that business interest.
Yes.
Why don't we let them come in and put some of their resources?
invest-
Why are we
yeah,
in
invest
America
themselves.
take all of our blood and put it in there?
Russia has offered to, and Iran has offered to, and they're eager to. They would like to get in on the cheap and help this thing. We're the ones that fought the tough fight, fought the 10 years. They are pretty certain that they could get in there in about 6 to 8 months. They could probably clean this thing up and nothing flat. I'm not going to say that's not going to happen. I mean, Hyder al-Abadi's got to figure out who's going to help me. And he's got to balance that against what does he have to win this thing to defeat ISIS and get his country back. He is a coalition guy. He will enlist all the tribes. He will round up all the provinces, and he'll get it done, but he'll get help from where he needs it and who's willing to help. So, but
Daniel, you have a question back here?
Yeah, so what you're saying is the validation for an international coalition must come from a UN mandate in the area that would give the validity towards the regional governments?
What amazes me right now is the UN Security Council could drive that mandate so easy in a matter of, America's really got to take a leading position on it. We need to before Russia does or before China does. But don't kid yourself. They have got strong interests in that 200 billion known reserves, 200 billion barrels of known reserves in Iraq. And only 30%, almost 35% of the country has been explored. 65-70% hasn't even been explored yet. So You know, if